Okay, so this is the question where we're going to separate everything.
Okay.
Okay. So far, it sounds like we talked about taking the Lord's name in vain.
Right.
And swearing and then crude talk. Because
Okay.
I guess I could crudely talk without swearing.
Yes.
Okay. So, as we think... Okay, I think we did the Lord's name in vain good enough.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
But swearing.
Okay.
So, what is that?
Okay.
I mean, we kind of already answered that, but like, what things should I not say?
I got you.
You know what I mean?
No, and that's what I was saying earlier. Like, it's hard because it's kind of these moving.
Yes.
Like, words change. Like, their meanings change over time.
Right, and that's the problem because God doesn't.
God doesn't.
Right.
So that's why I sit there and say, all right, well, what is obscene or crude, right?
Right.
And I do, and you said, well, doesn't that kind of, the line's always moving or kind of depends on, and I do think that's actually accurate.
Right. So
right?
why pay attention to any of it?
Well, because I do think it matters.
Just let loose. Like, you know, like that's where I've come to.
I know, but I think like, okay, so for example, for me, I was a young pastor. I was in my 20s.
Yeah.
And I'm preaching, and I just said, man, that just sucks.
Mm-hmm.
And I kept going into the sermon, and then I had two moms come up to me, horrified that I had used that word, and that their young daughters had heard me use that word.
Okay.
And so that was like and I had to realize this might be okay for me, and when I'm talking to my peer age.
Yes. But
when I have to realize I'm in front of this group and there's individuals, especially individuals that are older than I am, well, that word is still a very obscene or crude word, to them.
Okay.
And so I had to realize that I have to be more aware of, who I'm around.
Because of who you are.
But I would say it's not because of me as a pastor.
Okay.
I think it's me as a follower of Christ.
Okay.
To say, I want to be able to love people well enough to say, you know what? I love you well enough to go, all right, if I think this is going to be crude or obscene, I'm not going to go there.
Okay.
Yeah. And I may not do perfectly every time, but that's got to be my goal or my intent.
Okay. All right. Well, okay, so am I wrong for this in my thinking? I have decided that I don't care what anyone else's line is,
mm-hmm.
and here's my line. And I don't say GD or Christ or anything like that, but I'll say all the other ones because that's what it says in the Bible.
Okay.
Right? That's where I've decided the line was. So is that bad?
For me, again,
right,
the way that I'm looking at Scripture, and I think that it has to go back to like the intent of it, right?
Okay.
Like, are the word, like, am I trying, like, when I stand up there and say, man, that just sucks, like, am I,
was that a good intention in the way you
like
said
the
that?
way I said it,
Yeah.
and so, but I think, especially again, I think it's the intention I think that matters. But then I also think the people around us, like, we have to be mindful enough to care for the people around us. Like, so as followers of Christ, I don't want my brother or sister to stumble over my language, over my words. And so,
okay.
In other words, I feel like we've got a responsibility to, to hold our tongue, and, to be able to, because I do think generationally there are gaps, right? I do think that's the way that it is. That some and it could be generational, it could be geographical. There's these gaps of like where it's okay here but not okay there.
Okay.
Right? And as far as that's up to me, as far as I can do anything about it, I want to make sure that I am in a place where my words are as wholesome and as life-giving as they possibly can be.
Okay.
Yeah.
We both stand in front of audiences and say things. And
yes.
It's your audience is more sensitive than my audience. But
right.
My audience is more sensitive about different stuff than your audience would be.
Sure.
Like if I said some of the things that you say on stage, my audience would get mad at me.
Right.
So
Right.
and it's just weird. Like it's two completely different things, and it's like, I don't know, there's just like I guess why do you care that to have, like, I guess I just don't get why you care to have a line.
Okay.
Except any line. Why do you let other people define what you think is okay? That doesn't make sense to me, because I don't feel like we do that with any other thing in the Bible.
Yeah, but
do you get what I'm saying?
Yeah. No, I
don't let anybody else decide where I think, like the sex before marriage argument. Right. Everyone says, people have their own lines on how far you can go before marriage until it's sex.
Right.
I don't let anybody else determine that line for me. You know what I'm saying? Yeah. And that's what you would tell people, like, hey, you need to listen to God and know where that line is, because the Bible's not clear. So why would you let somebody else determine that line for you? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because you're letting other people determine this swearing line for you.
Yeah.
And that's weird.
Okay. But I also have to be sensitive, like when it's talking about, do not have any obscene talk, right? Through joking.
Right.
Like that's like, okay.
But that's not a clear line either.
That's not a clear line.
Yeah.
That's and I think that's the whole intent, right? Paul's not listing out, here's the words not to say.
Okay.
Because he knows it has to be culturally relevant.
So why are you changing what you're doing and not saying sucks anymore? Because even though you had a good intention in saying it in your sermon, just because somebody else got upset. Because again, it's like, all right, hold on one second. Let me just go to this. I don't get
it. Okay. I understand. Let me, I'm going to go to a couple different passages.
Yeah.
All right. Because I do think now we're kind of moving into something larger than just the language itself.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. I didn't know this was going to go this direction.
Yeah, I didn't either, actually.
Yeah.
So this is interesting. And so Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, and so in 1 Corinthians, Paul says, in verse 19 of 1 Corinthians chapter 9, although I am free from all and not anyone's slave, I have made myself a slave to everyone in order to win more people.
Okay.
To the Jews, I became like a Jew to win Jews. To those under the law.
Oh.
To those who are without the law, like one without the law. Though I am not without God's law, but under the law of Christ, to win those without the law. To the weak I became weak, in order to win the weak. I have become all things to all people, so that I may by every possible means save some. Now I'll do all of this because of the gospel, so that I may share in the blessings. And I think if we're not careful, we will allow our freedom to trump loving others.
Okay.
And freedom can never trump loving others. Like, freedom cannot be like the guy. Like, am I free to say this? Am I free to do this? The answer to those questions may be yes. But that's not the heart of God. The heart of the Lord is, but what's loving? What is the loving thing to do?
It's just this line where it's like, it's not a sin, technically, to say this word, in this context, but somebody else gets mad when I do it, so I should change what I do because of them?
Because
that's weird.
Well, but because it, okay. So if I'm moving it out of the context,
shouldn't I be changing myself to what God?
Yeah. Okay. Good.
Right.
So, but then God says, Paul is saying, but this is it. This is what it looks like.
Okay.
Paul's saying, this is what you do in loving the Lord. Is that you will become all things to all people. In other words, you will say, I'm willing to constrain myself for the sake of others. Okay.
Oh. Okay.
And so
this is like when the politicians go around and use the accent of whatever part of the country they're in.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, which is just terrible and foolish, but whatever. Yeah.
Well, howdy, everyone. Great to be in Texas.
Right.
Kind of sounded Australian there at the end. My bad.
Yeah, and I think this gets back to, when in again, Paul writing to the Romans at this point, and Paul, is writing through the Romans, and he ends up coming to the point to where he says, listen, to those who are weak, let's choose. In other words, he uses the kind of there are those who are strong and those who are weak. Okay, it's kind of the phrasing he uses. And so like in chapter 15 of Romans, he says, now, verse 1, now we who are strong have an obligation to bear the weaknesses of those without strength and not to please ourselves. Each one of us is to please his neighbor for his good, to build him up. For even Christ did not please himself. And I think that's, for me, one of the things that's like, all right, as a Christian, I'm going to take the position of whatever I can do to be loving and caring and kind to individuals around me, I will do. Okay. And I understand for some people it feels like, well, I mean, you feel like you're walking on eggshells all the time. And I don't think, and I don't think the Lord means for us to walk on eggshells, but I do think the Lord would say, all right, but do you have a sense of what's, in bringing it back to our context of what we're talking about, do you have a sense of what's obscene? Do you have a sense of what is not really okay to say? Like, you really shouldn't say that in this company. Then don't.
Okay.
Is what I think the Lord would say. So going back to the example I used earlier, why in the world would I change my language for two individuals who got upset with me? Because I want to love them as Christ would love them. And I can
Christ
easily
is telling you to love them by not saying sucks anymore because these two ladies got upset.
Yeah.
That's just...
Yeah, 100%.
I didn't know that was in the Bible, and it seems crazy.
Yeah.
That's ridiculous.
But it's not.
Why can't they get? Why doesn't the Bible say, "Hey,
let them get over it"?
If somebody else doesn't sin, but you don't like it, get over it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, because we've talked about all this stuff. Like, you like Star Wars, right?
Sure.
There's a bunch of Christians who would find it super offensive that you watch Star Wars. Are you going to stop watching Star Wars?
No.
See? Like, this doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
You should stop watching Star Wars because Christians get mad that other Christians watch Star Wars.
I know. And I understand this is kind of where the slippery slope lies, right? And so
if I let other...
Okay, so all right, I think but here's the thing. I think we do have to have a sense of loving one another enough, okay? So like if I know someone's child doesn't watch Star Wars, right? Let's use that example.
Okay.
But they're over at our house. Am I going to play Star Wars? No.
No.
Okay. Like keeping it
Star Trek.
Keeping it as I really hate Star Trek, but whatever.
Wow.
Yeah. I don't know. I'm sorry to any Trekkie.
How come all the offensive stuff that happens on this podcast is not the topic? You know what I mean?
I sorry to all my Trekkie fans out there. I just do not like Star Trek.
I don't like it either, but anyway. I like the new movies. Those were fun.
Yeah, those were pretty cool.
Because they were the most Star Wars-y Star Trek ever.
Right, with the old Star Trek.
With the old, yeah.
I just can't.
Yeah.
I had, and I don't know if you
even though I've heard some of it's like really good.
Yeah.
Like some of the storylines are like
I don't know,
really relevant and entertaining.
Man, I when I was a youth pastor, our pastor loved Star Trek.
Yeah.
And like, so that's...
Are we talking about this right now?
That's actually where I watched Star Trek for the first time, was at like my pastor's house. He had all the Star Trek movies, and he just loved them. And
my dad used to watch it all the time, and every time I'd come in the room, it would just be an alien and a person talking to each other in a hallway.
You're just like,
and I'm like, this is boring. Why are there no lightsabers?
Yeah. Anyways, so
all right. Anyway,
so I do think there's a way though to and none of us are perfect in it, right? But I do think there's a way to ensure that we're being as loving as we can.
Okay.
To others around us.
Okay. And so how are you not going against that verse by still watching Star Wars?
Well, because I don't think like in again, for most people that are in my circles that I'm running in, Star Wars isn't a big deal.
Okay.
If I'm watching it or not watching it, it's just not.
All
right? Now, if I was to stand up and say, the S word or whatever, oh yeah, that would be a whole different ball game, right?
Okay.
Like I might get fired. So I think that's the.
How nervous were you that day? I came on stage.
Yeah, so Nate's referring to one of the services we had. Nate was with me.
Yeah, we put it out on.
We did. So no, I was fine.
Okay,
I was fine. I was mostly.
I was
fine.
locked in.
I know you were. You did a good job.
Yeah.
But no, I do think that's. But I mean, I think it's a fair pushback on me.
Okay.
Right? I think it's a fair pushback, and so I guess I'm just saying, like, as much as we can to try to love each other. And I think things like what do you watch or what do you listen to probably are not going to be as offensive to some people as long as you're not bringing it into their environment.
Okay.
Like you want to, and I think
you brought sucks into these ladies' environment.
Correct.
And that was the problem.
Correct.
Okay.
Like, and I think that's the same thing. Like, and because, sorry. Anyway, I can go on forever. I'll just stop. So.
I could go on forever too.
Yeah.
All right. So just to get down to like the nitty gritty on it though.
Okay.
All right. So words are face sounds. How could that mean anything?
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And they're different face sounds for other countries.
Sure.
And even some of our face sounds in other countries aren't bad. Like they use some of our swear words as normal things.
Right. Sure.
Like the cigarette word.
Mm-hmm.
You know that one from, yeah. Anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how, like, what's the problem? Like, given that context, what's the problem with any of this?
Right. No, but words have to mean something.
Okay.
Right. They do mean that. They hold value, or they hold meaning. Put it that way.
All right.
Words hold meaning. Now, that might shift culturally over time, right?
Okay.
But in the moment, they still have to hold meaning.
Okay.
And so I do. But I do understand where the problem is because it's like, all right, I know, for example, there was like a group of individuals I was with. Like their big thing was like not just like the blatant cuss words,
right?
But the like substitute words is what they would call it.
I forgot about that whole part.
Like so no, you wouldn't say, S.
Yeah.
But if I say, oh shoot,
right? For
them, that was the equivalent,
right?
Don't say,
and it sounds awkward every time a Christian does that.
Yeah,
because they're Christian.
Right.
Learned that from other Christians.
Right. Don't say the D word. Right.
Oh, darn.
Or dang it.
Yeah.
Or, and so.
Oh, that's so much better than just the other one.
Right.
Like I just.
And so in that circle, like even those substitution, those substitute words were deemed just as bad.
Right.
And that one was really hard for me because I had never been in an environment like that before. Like, for me using shoot and dang it was like a significant improvement, right?
But it's not.
From where I was in high school, what I thought in my head.
Okay.
Right? I'm thinking it's a big improvement. And then I've got people coming down on me for using those words.
Yeah.
And I didn't think I was doing anything wrong. Like,
and
honest
you
to God.
Switched to other ones.
I didn't do anything wrong. And and then it's like, well, then where do you go?
Yeah.
Like, and I do think that can be problematic.
Okay.
Like, if you keep pushing down that trail, like, well then like, okay, I can't say that. I don't say shoot. I don't say crap. I don't like, what eventually are you left with?
But the problem is all those things mean the exact same thing as the other things. It's just.
They can, right? They do,
yeah,
right?
They do.
They do. I think
the meaning behind you saying it is the same thing.
But
so why not just say the
because
thing?
I do think part of this is, again, and I can only speak for my cultural thing here in the South, right?
Okay.
Is that if I use, the D word, the S word, the F word, whatever, like those would be considered obscene, crude
by South people. or most.
All I can speak toward is the societal, the people I'm running with, right, doing life with.
Mm-hmm.
Those would be seen as crude or obscene, right?
Right.
But for most people, that next step down, that oh shoot, that oh crap, that okay, cool, right?
Yep.
But then I know if I was to go up north, or if I'm in with individuals that have been in the military, like they're going to use those words that I think are crude and obscene.
Yep.
And that can be difficult
in an official capacity.
Right. And that can be difficult for me to wrap my head around sometimes.
Right. All right. So here's the next question.
Okay.
All right. So why? Okay. So you talked about how Christians got offended that you say sucks.
Right.
Why? Why are they so offended? Like why is it so offensive?
Because that's a word that they would deem as crude. Like
why? Why don't we just all agree that none of these words are bad and forget it?
Right.
And then we don't have to have this conversation and we don't have to talk about this on the podcast.
Yeah, I know.
Right?
I know. But
let's just all get over it.
Right. Okay. Well, that would be nice, but in our society, that's not the way. Right.
Okay.
That's like in every culture, in every society, you got words that mean certain things.
Right.
So you just don't, and they're crude, they're offensive, don't say it. Right. Like those words hold that distinction. Okay. And so therefore, that's the line.
Do you ever tell Christians that they need to, because here's the problem.
Okay.
Because they kick us teenagers out of stuff for saying words.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like it's like a sign of you're not going to heaven anymore.
Okay.
If I use these offensive words.
Okay.
And then you don't say them in church and no one cares and it's just like, oh, freedom. You know what I'm saying? And it's like, if you guys are the only ones that care, then less people are going to come in here.
Right.
Like if you keep getting offended by stuff I say, then I don't want to come hang out with you or be at, you know what I'm saying?
Right.
Or be at your church.
Right.
So why wouldn't what you tell your church family is let's try to be less sensitive about this stuff, because then we could have more longer conversations with non-Christian people who don't think any of this stuff's offensive.
Right.
And say things all the time.
Okay. So, all right. I think maybe you've just hit something on the head.
Okay.
That we can discuss.
All right.
I think there's a major difference between individuals that are Christian and non-Christian and their language.
Okay.
Okay. So you mentioned, hey, if non-Christians come in the door, don't be so judgmental. Don't tell them not to talk like that. And I actually would agree with you.
Okay.
Like, non-Christian comes in our door and they're just talking however. Why would they do anything different? And by us telling them to stop doing that, what does that actually accomplish?
Right.
Right? I actually agree with you on that.
Yeah, it just seems like you want to keep your church family insulated from that stuff.
Right.
And it's like, oh, I guess we're on the outside of this and we can't be here.
Right. No, and I actually would agree with you.
Okay.
Okay. Now, I don't think that for Christians who are, maturing in their faith, I don't think they should go around saying all these words.
Okay.
Right. And again, I'm talking about where we are in the South, in Georgia, culturally. That's where but again, for the non-Christian coming into like our church, and because the thing is, we don't want to we're not there. If they're a non-Christian, why am I expecting any of their behaviors to change?
Right.
Just because they're coming into a church.
But this could go as far as, I am a Christian and I was pissed one day for some reason.
Right.
Sorry about my language.
Yeah.
And I was angry one day for some reason, and I said some words, and then the only thing that the Christian people are focused on is not why I'm angry. It's the fact that I said some words.
Yeah, no, and I agree with that. Okay, so, all right, someone's listening to this podcast, and I'm telling your story. I know I am, but I'm not going to use your name. And so a couple of weeks ago, our church had a local missions work site.
Okay.
Right? We're helping build something. And someone drives a screw into their finger.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And
that's a good time to let one rip.
Right. And they did.
Okay.
Right. And because that that hurt,
Yeah.
right? And so, and they did it in front of
And then they were on the ground bleeding out, and everyone else around them were like, "You swore!"
Well, what was
How could you do that?
So he did it. And so the person that was right beside he was working with. So this is kind of a younger guy, and the individual he was with was an 80-year-old individual, and so he just draws his screw into his finger. Oh, and then he felt terrible about it,
Right?
Because he had just used this word in front of this gentleman. But the cool thing was the gentleman didn't care at all.
Well, good.
Because he knew that the guy reacted the way he did because he's got a screw through his finger.
Yeah.
Right? And so my point just being is I agree with you.
But there are Christians that would have turned around and slapped the guy while he was bleeding.
Right.
For swearing.
Right. And I do think that's problematic.
Okay.
Right.
So how do you tell these people to get over it?
Yeah. And I do think that's the difference of because I've even said words, right?
Yes.
And so
on this.
Yeah, I got mad one time.
In good context,
right? And so I do think that, but I've done it when I have, slammed my finger with a hammer or whatever, right? Yeah. Or I feel like someone brakes right in front of you and you slam on your brakes, and especially when my kids are in the car, you're holding back, and then of course you cuss in front of your kids, and they're like, "Man, my dad, the pastor's just over here just cussing." So I do think that in other words. And I think Paul would agree with it. Context does matter to this, right?
Okay.
In other words, it's one thing when I'm just using obscene words or crude joking, just because, right? And because I do think that when we're using words that man, that hurt, or, dadgummit, I can't believe I just did this, or whatever, right? I do think that context does matter to this. And I do think we need to be more gracious with one another in this sense. But I don't think we need to back away from the fact of, but obscene and crude joking and talking, we don't need to just allow it to just run free and run rampant. I don't think that's beneficial for Christians either.
Okay.
So.